I started life as a live sound engineer, mixing bands, and then I went via 20 years as a producer in science communication, where I worked with Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, who some of you might know from the ABC. I worked across a lot of media content with Karl. And then 5 or 6 years ago, I brought together my worlds of art and science and started working with a music company called Uncanny Valley. And the idea was to build the tech arm of their business. And that involved us exploring using artificial intelligence and machine learning as a way to build tools to assist the music industry and to look at building some products. Through a convoluted series of events, I met my colleague, Beth Shulman.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth. It would be weird if I wasn't. I actually spent most of my career in advertising, making commercials for a living. But about 3 years ago, I really started thinking about technology and how much there is truly undiscovered and underutilized areas of technology by the wider world. People just don't know that there's a lot of stuff out there that can be utilized and assisted with. So I started talking to friends at Google's Creative Lab, and I ultimately partnered with a creative technologist to start our own independent experimental lab called Heyday. What we do is we partner with companies around the world to explore the intersection between emerging technologies and culture. And our mantra is to try and make the future as magical as possible. And I know that sounds a little airy-fairy, but I think that truly believe that when technology is applied in the right and correct way, it truly moves humanity forward.
So when Beth and I were putting this talk together, I said something that she thought was good, so we wrote it down. And that is that new technologies are not a new thing, and it's how we use them that matters. And one example I would give of that is back in 1982, this happened. The London Musicians Union was seeking to ban synthesizers. There was, quite a few people within the music industry, particularly, the orchestras, who genuinely perceived synthesizers to be a threat, and which would have been a real tragedy, because we would have had to live without Depeche Mode. For some people, that just would have been a really terrible thing. But if you think about it, not a lot has changed. There's still a massive fear of emerging technologies in a lot of sectors, actually, and the creative industries is absolutely one of those.
And obviously, right now, artificial intelligence in particular is really feeding this fear. People have a real sense that they might be replaced rather than be assisted by AI and machine learning. Before we go around throwing around more words like AI and ML, which I understand, we're speaking at the AI Institute, so this is awkward at best, but we want to just boil it down to what that actually means. And I know for a lot of you out there, this is incredibly elementary, but just bear with us as we've been told that this is public facing, and we're also not developers, so we just want to put it in plain English. What is machine learning? Machine learning is a subset of AI. Instead of building a computer program to do specific things, we build a program that can learn. Then we teach it by showing it examples of what we want. It can solve complex, nuanced problems that are beyond the realms of traditional programming. And you train it. You train the machine to do what you want it to do.
So as you would also know, many areas that are using artificial intelligence in their industries, there's these standard issues that sort of come up around data and ethics, intellectual property, commercialization, replacement versus assistance. So what are we doing? Are we trying to replace the humans, or are we building technology that can assist them, that will be useful to them? And that's the latter. That's what we would like to do. One of the things that we looked at a lot since we've learned a lot over the last few years, and things that we like to think about now are who collected the data. As you know, input data can be anything. It could be pictures, it could be music, video, words, numbers. And as you would also know, what goes in is quite different often to what comes out. So we feel we need to give a lot of thought to, who collected this data and what this data is, who's making these decisions, who's coding these models. And ultimately, when we look at IP, we want to know about who owns the data that we're using, because it has a real impact on, the output from the machine and who owns that.
And obviously IP then feeds into commercialization and ownership. So who profits from the machine, what the machine produces, and how is that shared? And finally, what does the technology seem to be doing? Is it replacing an existing creator, or is it being of assistance? All of these themes are incredibly fraught, particularly in the creative industries, as things like music and poetry and art are already industries where ownership of a picture or a song means the difference between a starving artist or a pop star. But we feel like the best way to talk about this is really going through some case studies, some projects that both Caroline and I have worked on. Take it away, Caroline.
Well, I'm going to take us back to 2020, when Uncanny Valley formed Team Australia, and we competed in the very first AI song contest after being invited by a broadcaster in the Netherlands. We formed a team with some colleagues actually from UNSW, Oliver Bowen and Brendan Wright. And each of the teams were given a level playing field of data. So they gave us the top 3 winners of Eurovision from 1956 to 2020, which was the entire duration of Eurovision. But we were allowed to do, to include extra data. So we collected all the lyrics from all the Eurovision songs ever. I personally did that and cleaned that data up, and it was a very dull task, I'll let you know. And the other thing that we were allowed to do was to include any other data that we liked. So we thought, how can we make our entry particularly Australian? The bushfires had just happened, so we decided that we would pay homage to the devastation of the wildlife. So we collected the sounds, which I got from a zookeeper friend of mine, of koalas, kookaburras, and Tasmanian devils. And we also used that as training data. We'd been working with the creative lab at Google as well, and there was a really new audio model out called DDSP. So we used that model to train our wildlife sounds on, and basically it combined and converted all of the animal sounds into one sound, and we called that our Koala Synthesizer, and it sounded a little bit like this. So, and as you're probably thinking, that is not going to be #1 on Billboard. It's just not going to cut it. So bring in the humans, produce it up, put it back in the song, and it sounded like this. Now, taking part in this contest started to make us think more and more about data. Who are this data that we were using, and what did this mean for the final output? And then as we went on to work on some other projects, we started to use things like Open Jukebox AI, which had been trained on 2 million songs. And we started thinking, should the original creators of those songs also be getting a share of the output? If we create a new song from that, should they be listed as writers? On the one hand, a model like that is just helping you speed up time. I mean, it's not possible for us to listen to 2 million songs in this, possibly ever in our life, but Open Jukebox can do it very quickly, and it can give us a lot of ideas from that, But on the other hand, it would be incredibly expensive for the people that wrote that model to license those songs. It just wouldn't make financial sense. And, if you extrapolate a stage further, you start thinking, what if we use that model, we write a song, and then one day a copyright checker comes along and it analyzes our song, and we find that we've got, 50 individual samples in that song because we've co-composed with an AI model that's based on 2 million songs belonging to other people. Are we finally going to find ourselves in a position where, we've infringed copyright and now we owe a lot of money to a whole bunch of other creators? So it's a bunch of deeply philosophical questions that started to come up to us as we started to use these technologies. And, a lot of them are still not answered. So that's where we found ourselves. But the good news is, we went on to win and we got a fancy trophy. So that was great. And we got a lot of media out of this, which was, not just a fun thing. I personally don't like being in the media. I prefer to be behind the scenes, but it was really useful to raise these questions publicly, the matters that I just discussed before. And in regards to our own team, who wrote the winning song and who owned the copyright and who got to commercialise it, well, here's our team. We registered every single member of our team, including Brendan there with the headphones on. He's from New South Wales Uni as well, and he is a data scientist. So we think that might have also been a first, that we registered every single member of the team and in data scientist at that. You know, when we put this team together, we were trying on purpose to have as much diversity as possible in our team, because, you know, it's something that I personally find very important. And, you know, we could have done better, but we're in COVID, and, you know, we did the best we could. But what we learnt a lot from this is when you're designing systems and when you're designing, you know, these kinds of models and building tools, it's really important to look at the whole system. And part of that whole system is the people. And this is something I am particularly interested in and remain interested in. The AI Song Contest is currently on at the moment. It's the finalists are online. You can go and check them out. Oliver Bowen and I from New South Wales Uni are judges again this year. So please go and have a listen.
So while this next project didn't actually win any awards, it did make some money, although it made crypto, which means it didn't really make any money at all at this point in time. So this is an interesting one. Heyday was approached by a musician who wanted to create art using written memories that they had collected from friends and people around the world to launch with a single that they were launching. Enter Minmos, an ML model trained on millions of photos, pictures, and visual identities. We created 999 artworks using Minmos. You can see some of the examples here. So what we ended up doing was we had text form of memories, like hiding in the attic in Paris during the war, and then Minmos would spit it out, would interpolate it and spit it out as a visual image. Now, some of these images were just incredible. They were fascinating, they were beautiful, and they were pretty heart-stopping and heartbreaking and sometimes, and we were able to monetize that. So we converted them and minted them into NFTs and made some money that way. Now, obviously, there's some really similar issues that Caroline brought up as to this ML model. It wasn't trained by us, so we didn't have control over where the data came from. It was more than likely scraped from millions of images online. At one point, we found a lot of unconscious bias in the model, in the labeling of some of the images. This tends to happen when you're relying on one or two developers to train the model. We had to redo more than one memory to get a decent result or a decent picture. And then we also had the ownership issues. So while the written memories we used with permission, we didn't own the data that went into it. But the output was a unique picture that the machine created, and the machine can't own anything. So ultimately, we owned the images, and we shared that ownership, obviously, with the group of individuals that created the project, and we were able to commercialize it. But this is a really fraught area, and it's an ongoing ethical issue for many people utilizing existing ML models, and I think training and creating ML models in the future.
It's a bit odd, but I also just totally love hiding in an attic in Paris during the war. What a great image. I'm just going to quickly take you through another project that I've worked on with Uncanny Valley, which is called Bimu. Bimu is essentially a remix engine that can output endless amounts of music. Its input is all created by humans at this stage. And it's a database of what Justin Shave, who designed it, calls akeens. These are musical samples that are have embedded coding in each sample, and what that does is allow the whole database to work together musically. And it's really important that that works together well, because it always needs to sound good. You know, and you might be thinking, why do you want to output endless amounts of music? Well, the world needs as much music as possible, let's be honest. But the other thing is, this is not an idea of replacing humans. This is about using technology to generate, you know, new ideas, song suggestions. It might be catchy little bits that could be used by DJs in songwriting. And also it can be used to stream as a live remix. And we did that last year when we were all judges again on the AI Song Contest. and we took what are called the musical stems, so the bits and pieces that make up a song are known as stems. And we got all the entrants in the AI Song Contest last year to give us their musical stems to choose their favourite catchy hooks from their songs. And we put them all into the Bimu engine and created this ongoing stream, which is available on the website. You can go and have a look at bimu.live, and it's there happily churning away and playing music. There are a bunch of different engines out there at the moment that are doing sort of similar things. Some of them sound really terrible, some of them sound great. Endel is a really big one. It makes a lot of sleep music, and many of them are moving towards a concept known as adaptive music. And that is where we use other forms of input data, like it could be where you are, your geolocation, it could be a pulse, it could be a mood, and all of those things can be used to change the music in real time. Now, whilst music might be becoming more super personalized, which is kind of fun, it's really important with these projects to think of them as collaborations with artists. That's for a couple of reasons. We need to ensure that the artists are continued to be paid and that we can use their work and their existing work to do these things. And the other thing about including the artists is it makes it sound great.
And then finally, there's a project that just actually launched that we worked on called Talk to the Moon. And this was launched for a creative arts festival in the UK that's currently running. We also partner with WeTransfer on this one, so you can find it on WeTransfer's site. And the remit for it was to figure out a way to use artificial intelligence to allow people to experience talking to the moon. Now, that doesn't mean in binary, that doesn't mean, trying to capture space noises. We wanted people to pretend to have a real conversation with the moon. Now, having any kind of conversation with AI is at a huge minefield at the moment. As you can see, there is a lot of headlines. Caroline, next one. There's a lot of headlines right now out there in the media in relation to Google's Lambda. All of these headlines happened in like the last week. So the fear is real. Not only are we scared of a machine coming to life, but we're scared of what they will say when they do. And it's also, I'm sure, as many of audience members knows, it's why very few sophisticated models are public facing. People are very, very scared of what it's going to say and what it's going to do. So our question was, how do you make it less scary and instead a fun and pleasurable experience? That was our big question. And our first solution was to not use an ML model. What we chose to do was use a little bits and pieces of AI to string sort of what we call an online play together. So one of the first things we did was we pre-recorded a human voice and we sewed it together in conversational pathways, like a choose your own adventure. We interviewed and used voices of our audience, 18 to 25-year-olds in the UK. And we used AI in various ways. We used it as sentiment analysis. We also used speech to text, obviously, and we wanted to make sure that the AI was the thing that was choosing which answers were most appropriate. I just want to play a little clip of what Luna sounds like.
Hello. Oh, Jesus, you scared the out of me. I was just having a bit of me time.
So as you can see, Luna has quite the personality. And some conversations are funny, some are sad, some are deep, some are meaningful, and others are just plain completely wrong. But that was the experiment, and we had a really good time doing it. And I feel like this is a good example of repurposing AI as a tool rather than a replacement in creative industries. We were able to create an online play using bits and pieces of AI, and I think throughout creative industries, people can really utilize the tools for benefits.
I agree. Just mindful of the time, so we'll start moving towards wrapping up here. And, you know, a few of the learnings that we've had, which is around knowing where your data is coming from as much as possible. And, you know, identifying your team and making sure you've got diverse viewpoints and a range of experiences and skill sets in your team. I think it's like increasingly important. And, you know, I don't think anyone here would disagree with me on that one.
And I hate to sound like a broken record, but just make sure that the AI is being utilized as an assistive tool and not as a replacement. It will never be human, even if it looks, talks, and acts like it. And finally, if you choose or are able to commercialize it, make it as equitable and fair to all creative contributors, whether they're inputting data or they have a hand in the output.
Beth keeps saying it's never going to be human, and I keep telling her that the engineer from Google just doesn't agree with her. Sorry. Just finally, like to give a shout out to another project that some colleagues of ours have done called the Tracker Data Project, which was done by Professor Angie Abdullah, Adam Goods and Baden Palethorpe from ANU. You can jump onto their website and go and have a look at that. If you're visiting Adelaide or Melbourne, I think it's moving to in the coming months, then you might want to go and check it out because it's really beautiful. And with Uncanny Valley and UNSW, we have done, you know, quite a bit of R&D and knowledge sharing. We've collaborated on actual R&D, and we're now moving to, you know, working on a few commercial collaborations, such as the one that we're currently doing with the School of Cybernetics down in Canberra. That's quite a complex project that we're doing together. It's going to take a lot of external data sources and human engagement. It's a little bit in the adaptive model that I mentioned earlier. So we'll be using data to sort of change the music. I think that's probably the subject of another talk down the track. And just finally, there's some thank yous, obviously, to Harris, Kate and Charlie at UNSW AI. But probably one of my main collaborators and supporters at New South Wales Uni has been Oliver Bowen in the Interactive Media Lab, and his now PhD student Rodolfo, and Marina, who I'm sure many of you know at UNSW. And the other person that's always been incredibly supportive of us is Professor Toby Walsh. And thank you.
We've got a couple more questions for you. So the first one from Pierre Longchamp. Beth, what method framework did you use to identify and address the initial bias in the developers' labeling that you mentioned?
That is a wonderful question. We didn't use any framework or method. We did it very much based on what the output was. So what we ended up doing is, when we found something that felt bias related, whether it be with a word that came in such as black or anything like that, and depending on what the output was, we had to change our input. So we changed the wording of the memory. Some of them just never turned out correctly, so we just decided to sort of throw them aside. But I don't come from, unfortunately, an academic background, so the methodology that we used was basically, you know, using our eyes and ears, unfortunately.
Excellent. And the next question is from Bridgepoint Advisory. Did you use a set of principles to design your use cases? And if so, would you be able to share them?
Was that for me?
Is that for?
It's for the two of you, whoever wants.
Caroline?
Can you repeat that question, sorry?
Did you use a set of principles to design your use cases? And if so, would you be able to share them?
With the AI song contest, we did. We actually had to write an entire process document, which is actually, I think, available online. So, yes.
Oh, so someone can Google it. And from Craig Tomler, this is a more general question. There's a range of commercial AI solutions on the market today, which are often pushing the boundaries of our knowledge of AI, more so than universities. How does UNSW intend to collaborate with commercial entities in the future? Craig, you should reach out to us. You've got an interesting AI thing yourself. We're open to people reaching out to us as an institute, and ping Harris.
We're also open to, you know, anybody who's a developer that wants to talk, who might be interested in the creative side of things. You know, there's some interesting stuff going on. So if you're a student or you're a member of staff and you want to chat, we'd love to.
Excellent. And the last one, another one from Pierre. Carolyn, how does the academic/commercial collaboration happen practically? And is there room for translational research kind of process, or do you think it's more ad hoc?
I don't really know the answer to the second part of that, but I think the first part, you know, for example, when I first started working with Uncanny Valley, I started looking around and saying, you know, thinking, where's the community for this in Australia? Who's working in this space? And there wasn't anybody. So, you know, having spent 15 years working in a university in my job with Dr. Carl, the first thing I did was, you know, look around the academic space, because I thought that's where we're going to find the people that really know what's going on. Because internationally, University of Champaign, Illinois, that's where a lot of this music technology stuff in particular has come out of. So it was the obvious thing for me to do. And, you know, we tracked down Oliver Bowen. And basically we just started meeting up and, you know, having chats about this stuff. And, you know, it was very clear immediately that Ollie knew the international landscape of what was going on. I think it's an absolute no-brainer that companies collaborate with universities more. There's just so much knowledge that can be shared in both directions. And the more of it, you know, the more of it we have, the better. I just can't talk more positively about the experience that we've had working with Ollie and now Rodolfo, and, you know, having access to people like Toby and Flora. I'm going to be hitting up Flora, I reckon, in the future. Yeah, there's so many benefits to it, and I encourage it.
There is one more question from Marianne, but I think I'm going to save that one to the end, Marianne. So thanks to Carolyn and Beth. So we've got a question from Marianne Williams, and this is for everybody. And first she phrased it, why don't you think AI will ever be able to replace humans? And then she rephrased it to, why do you think AI will never be able to replace humans?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, this is a discussion that could go on all day, I would imagine, between a lot of different people. But I guess my question back would be, why do you want it to replace humans? I think that is a huge, you're kind of playing into a huge fear that ordinary non-technical people have about AI. And we want to make sure that when we talk about AI, we're dispelling the sort of myths of that. And I think we could all go into a lot of different details of what is the difference between man and machine, at least at this point in time. And I think that there are a lot of differences to it. And hey, in the future, there may be less and less. But I'm just curious, you don't think it's possible? I mean, I just think that a human thinks differently than the way that a machine does, and the data, it can only respond to the data that is input into it, and it can only grow from that data. And I guess you could argue that humans do the same thing, obviously, over time, but I also think that there is an innate sense of stuff that is around humans that are fed into us, and also creativity in general, that I don't think, at least at this point in time, I have seen or am going to see a machine be able to replicate. Caroline?
Oh, well, I would be interested into why you would think that it could replace humans.
Well, I mean, Marianne made the point that she doesn't, but she would.
yeah. I mean, you know, like, computers don't have emotions; they're not biological at this point in time. Yet, I guess. I don't know. Why, I don't think we would want to be honest. And I think that's a goal that we should be working towards. So
I think if I can just quickly comment on replacing whether the human as a whole or just a specific task, because really, you know, at the end of the day, AI is really good in doing computation, and that kind of computation often is beyond our capability. You know, for example, if you have thousands of images or sounds, records or clips or text, right? And being able to summarize, being able to digest, being able to synthesize things, these are the different narrow tasks that I think AI can do better than human.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And last question from Craig Tomler, how do we help to reframe the discussion to be around how AI can assist and enable humans? Well, I think this institute it's one of the things that we will be looking at. You know, we're not just here to do the compute bit, we're here to look at the AI ethics and to frame the entire conversation and to help to contribute to the conversation in the world, in the broader world. So I think that's what we're on about. So thanks very much to all of our speakers today. Thank you very much for attending. Here's our links again. We will make the slides available, and we will also make video of this event available. So we'll let you know when that's up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.